It is late in the evening. I'm Oswald Alves of Winterman Advocacy, and welcome to the Hot Seat. Now, I hope you all are sitting down for this, because this is something I've never done before. Not this, I've already done one Hot Seat. What I have that you can't see right now on my other screen is actually a script. You heard that right? I have a script in front of me. That script is like 4 pages long. And it's about what I'm about to talk about. If you're seeing this and if you're reading it, the subtitle is called The Real Difficulty of Care. Now, you might be wondering, let me get in a proper seating position. When you have back issues, there's not much else you can do. What you might be wondering is why the subtitle, why The Real Difficulty of Care. Now, the reason I chose that particular title is kind of a joke or a play on words, or because what our great country has is this thing called difficulty of care. It's something in place for independent caregivers to basically not have federal withholding, to incentivize these family members of these disabled people to become independent caregivers. But the reason I chose to say what the real difficulty of care is that many people don't understand what goes into taking care of somebody with a disability and the hoops you have to jump through. And all the craziness that can happen. Because craziness happens. I mean, it's happening even now with me. I'll get more into that later. So, I sat down and I watched a documentary a couple of days ago. That documentary is called He's My Brother. It's on PBS. Go watch it, please. I will leave a link in the description below. Shout out to PBS. That documentary is killer. But basically, that documentary is about a person named Peter who is severely disabled. He is both blind and deaf and is autistic, has autism. And essentially the premise of it is it's from the perspective of his older sister, who basically their family is having difficulty finding an adult daycare for him and finding more adequate care. He's currently living at home with his parents, but again, with so many disabilities and so many other issues, it's becoming harder for them as his parents get older. And as his parents get older, the responsibility begins to fall on his sister. And over the course of the documentary, the sister expresses concerns of like being afraid and being nervous to essentially become her brother's primary caregiver because of all of his disability. What she wants is to find an adequate place for Peter to have the care that he needs and also be able to kind of live her own life. Like, she even says, I want Peter to be involved with my life, but I also want him to have a dignified life, a life that is his own. And so, as I was watching this documentary, I got to thinking about my own situation with my own sibling, because we've had this conversation before of like, what will happen the day that my parents aren't here to take care of me? And when it will just be me and him as far as immediate family. The state has services so that I can maintain my care and my care provider and live in a facility and live with other people with disabilities. That's there, but at the same time, they had these resources, but I don't think they understand all of the different implications of losing your primary care, because one of the things that the documentary also talks about, especially when the mother is talking, is that she essentially says Peter not only relies on me physically, but also psychologically. And again, that resonated with me as well, because my primary caregiver is my mother, and she has been for years, even before she was my state caregiver. And so, should the day ever come to where she is no longer able to take care of me, there's not only this portion of the physical attention and physical care that's going to go away, there's also a very large psychological component, and the documentary talks about this as well, of like when Peter's mother is no longer there, there's going to be this psychological component that Christine is unsure about. Like, she even wonders, will he make the same demands of me as he does with my mother, who's been taking care of him all of her life? And the psychological component of care is really a big thing that happens. And so on that, like on the aspects of being somebody's caretaker and caregiver, I was scrolling around Twitter and I saw this tweet from this person who was also somebody that had autism, and they were their family member, and they took them into a ladies' restroom at a church. And the ladies in that restroom were vehemently upset. They basically forced the pair to go into the men's restroom without any sort of understanding or communication, or basically their argument was that they felt unsafe. Like, I am the first one to say that, like, general neutral bathrooms are a good thing, and everybody deserves to be in the bathroom of their choice. But the other thing that this person talked about too was not only the gender neutral bathroom movement, but redefining who exactly should be in what bathroom and under what circumstances, because this is something that I've had to do. I've had to go in with my mother into a women's restroom because I essentially need, in some cases, full physical assistance to use the restroom. I need someone to help and make sure my urinal is in the right position so that I don't make a mess of myself. I need someone to help me wash my hands because sometimes bathroom sinks aren't the most accessible things ever, and I need more help. And I myself have never been through something like this where someone took offense to my presence in the bathroom of the opposite gender, but the exception is never the rule, especially when it comes to disability. Like, things happen to people with disabilities all the time. And so one of the things that I kind of thought about in the moment, and I actually put on this Twitter post, is that how could you feel unsafe if the caregiver's job, like a large portion of the caregiver's job, is to guarantee your safety in that situation, guarantee that proper behaviors and proper protocols are followed. How do I know this? I know this because it comes up in the evaluation that they do every year for your caregiver. Like, it's what I essentially like to call the field sobriety test, because that's what it feels like to have this assessment done, because they actually test you for cognitive function. Like, do you know what day it is? Where are we? What state do we live in? What time is it? Apple penny table. If you know what that means, you know what that means. And so inappropriate behaviors, like they ask you, like, do you have episodes of anger? Do you have behavioral issues, unhealthy behaviors? Like, they ask about, and YouTube, please do not monetize me for this, they ask about, like, chronic masturbation, and they ask about your sex life. They ask about a lot of things. And so, back to my point of the caregiver's duty is to avoid inappropriate behavior in that scenario, because that's what they ask. Now, even if this person who took this autistic person into this bathroom wasn't their state-trained caregiver, like, you don't understand what it's like to be a family member of somebody with disability. You pick up on our idiosyncrasies and you start to, like, understand us on a deep level of, you kind of know what you need to avoid with us and what you need to remind us of. I think more so with somebody who has a more severe disability. And so, while I get their concern, I also don't understand, like, if somebody is there with the person with a disability, what is your issue? Like, the other person is there in an official capacity or not to guarantee your safety and be that buffer against inappropriate behavior, because that's really what a caregiver is that they stand as this bridge between the person with a disability and the rest of the world. Because what a caregiver is essentially doing is, a caregiver is another adaptation, another component, almost like another mobility device, is it's like bridge some of those disabilities that we have with the world. That's what a caregiver is for. And so that kind of leads me to the point and the crux of this video, is that, like, more and more of that kind of getting this insider information on what the real difficulty of care is. It's like, I appreciate the incentive, but the term that the state uses, difficulty of care, doesn't even scratch the surface when it comes to what life is really like. So, because ultimately, caring for a person with a disability isn't easy. It's probably one of the most difficult things that can be done. And it's not difficult for the person that cares for the person with a disability and the person with the disability either. I mean, my life, as some of you see it, like, you're kind of getting the good parts. What many don't understand is that what you see now took years to do and took years of effort to do. I remember one time going to Best Buy with a friend of mine, and we went into the store, and one of the employees saw my wheelchair, and I still had my van at the time, and they saw my van, and they started to ask me about it, like how I got my van, what the process was for getting my wheelchair, and I did my best to give them the best advice that I could. But as we were leaving, I turned to my friend and I said, what you see that I have right now as you see me took so much time, and I do not envy that man who is just starting out. Because he told us that his newborn son was born with a disability. And so I told him, I do not envy that man because he is just starting out, because this is something I wouldn't even wish on my worst enemy, because of just how difficult it is and how many different caveats there are to being disabled and to being someone that cares for someone who is disabled, because the fatigue is so very real that my home state of Washington even has contingencies for it. They have what is called respite care, which is when somebody comes in and gives the primary caregiver a break. If you need to have that in place, something's wrong. Like, realize how much stress caregivers are under. If this is something that needs to be put in place by the state government of this respite phase and of having multiple caregivers. The real difficulty of care is so much more than any one person can try and label under one term. And the problem is, and I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it until I'm blue in the face, the people that make these rules on work week limits and all these different barriers for receiving care usually aren't people with disabilities, so they don't know what the real difficulty of care is. They don't know what it takes to care for somebody like me or somebody who has an even more severe disability. And those worries of, like, they need to be able to live a dignified life even when I'm not around are very real. So yeah, that's kind of been me up on my soapbox about this, about like what the real difficulty of care is, how difficult things can really get, because what people see with me and with a lot of people with disabilities who are quote unquote normal, that has taken years of effort to cultivate, and there's still times when things slip up because resources are crap. I'm not afraid to say it. Even now, I'm trying to get a work week limit increase for my mother. The stuff that I have to do, because that is somebody else's decision, that care should only be done 65 hours. Like, I get that that is our standard work week, but that does not take into account the individual. That does not take into account the care provider that has 3, 4, or 5 clients. So the real difficulty of care varies too much for somebody who has never had to have an independent care provider to ever make a decision on. And that goes for a lot of things. I mean, there are these inequalities that still exist. Marriage is a massive example. Right now we have the majority of marriage equality. What we're missing is marriage equality for people with disabilities, because the way that the laws currently work right now, if you get married as a person with a disability, you lose SSI and you lose a lot of other benefits, because the financial responsibility falls onto your partner to essentially take care of you. I have known many friends who had disabilities who refused to get married because that would mean a change in their benefits. A change so drastic that they essentially would lose too much for it to be worth it. And if you want to talk about marriage inequality for the disabled is something that not a whole lot of people look at, know about, and think about. But anyway, that has been my rant for hot seat number 2. The real difficulty of care. Caring for somebody with a disability is much more complicated than you think. There's so many avenues and things that happen and that go down that you don't realize. It's a mess, and it's not getting any better because the people that make the rules have never been disabled. But anyway, I'm done ranting. The iced coffee I had that opened my third eye is slowly fading away. I have been Oswald Alves of Wintermain Advocacy. Please like and subscribe. I will throw a music track and I will upload this. Do all of the things so that this sees as many eyeballs as is necessary, because these are very real things that happen to real people. Like, especially with CDUR right now, people aren't getting paid right, or they're not getting their vacation. So many different things. I've heard so many different stories of people not being able to pay their bills, or getting shortchanged on their paychecks, or getting these weird cash payments in lieu of pay, which they then have to pay back. The system of personal care is a hot mess right now. It's the hottest mess around. Oh man, the things I could talk about and discuss, and I don't have enough hours in the day. I would have to start at like 5 in the morning in order to get everything I need to get out. But this is the hot seat. This is my kind of podcast series. This has no face cam. All it has is a black and white title that says hot seat number 2, and then the subtitle is the real difficulty of care for my friends who are visually impaired. This is kind of my description. I'm Oswald Alves with Wintermain Advocacy. Once again, like, subscribe. I'll say it till I'm blue in the face, because if I don't, this doesn't move forward, and this doesn't go forward. Thank y'all. Good night.